All right, so I have a question for you guys, right? In your opinion, what do you think is more important for a fighter to be? One, a jack of all trade, and two, a specialist. Now, let's break that down. Let's break each one down properly, just to make sure that we understand exactly what the hell we're talking about. So, when you say a jack of all trade, you're referring to someone who knows how to do a lot of different things, but is not exactly a master at any of those things. And in reference to mixed martial arts, you're talking about a fighter who has a lot of different skills. He's good, he's decent at a lot of different skills. And, in MMA, we're talking about skills like boxing, kickboxing, the ability to grapple, jujitsu, wrestling, the ability to fight in the clinch, a fighter who has really good conditioning. So a jack of all trade in MMA would be a fighter who has all those skills. He's fairly good at all those skills, but he's not a master at any of them, as in he doesn't stand out at any of those skills. But then when you take a look at a fighter in MMA who is a specialist, you're looking at a fighter who also has a lot of those different skills, but then he really, really shines at one specific thing. So if I was to give you guys examples, I would say, in my opinion, like a good jack of all trade would be someone like Jon Jones. Jon Jones is a jack of all trade in the sense that Jon Jones knows how to do every single thing. He's extremely well rounded. But then when you break down each of his skills, when you break down his striking, or you break down his wrestling, or you break down his ability to fight in the clinch, there is not one specific skill that you would say, John, if you just pull Jon Jones, let's just say you pull Jon Jones out and just have him kickbox with the best kickboxers in the world. There are a lot of kickboxers in the world that Jon Jones will not be able to compete with. If you pull Jon Jones out and say, Jon Jones, go compete with the best wrestlers in the world, there are a lot of wrestlers in the world that Jon Jones will not be able to compete with. Same thing with his jiu-jitsu, same thing with his clinch work. Even with skills that he's extremely good at, like his conditioning. There are a lot of people out there that Jon Jones would not be able to compete with when it comes to conditioning. The one thing that Jon Jones excels with is putting everything together as a mixed martial artist. Another very good example of an extremely well-rounded fighter, but not really a specialist, is someone like Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. He does every single thing really well, but if you really start to pull at his skills one by one, he doesn't really excel, as in he's not the absolute best at one thing. But then when you take a look at someone who's a specialist, for example, you're talking about guys like Israel Adesanya, who is a world-class kickboxer. He's a good wrestler. He has very good takedown defense. There are a lot of other things in MMA that Israel does really well. But if you pull at one skill, which is his kickboxing, you start to realize that in the world of kickboxing, I'm talking fighters who spend their whole entire life focusing on nothing but kickboxing, Adesanya rises to the top. He's one of the best kickboxers in the world, period. Not in the UFC, in the world. Is he one of the best kickboxers? Take a look at someone like Khabib. You pull out just his sambo, his wrestling, his grappling. Khabib is one of the best grapplers, period. Damian Maia style character. So when you take a look at fighters like that, fighters who are a jack of all trade, they do every single thing really well, but they don't really excel at one specific thing. And then you look at specialists, Khabib, Israel, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Damian Maia. In your opinion, who would you say benefits more in the world of MMA? I really want to know what you guys think about that, because I've been thinking about that so much lately, especially going back to watch some of Jon Jones' newer fights, his latest fights, his fights against Thiago Santos, his fights against Dominic Reyes. And the one thing that I'm personally noticing, if you ask some people, like, why do you think Jon Jones is going downhill a little bit? Because, I mean, the truth of the matter is Jon is no longer as dominant as he used to be. He used to go in there, dominate fighters, either finish them on the ground, submit them, or stop them via TKO. If you ask some people, why do you think Jon is no longer as dominant as he used to be? You're going to get a lot of different answers. Some people will tell you the reason he's no longer as dominant is because Jon Jones is no longer on steroids. He's no longer taking performance enhancing drugs. Makes sense. There's some arguments to be made for that. And if you were to ask some people, they'll just tell you John Jones is getting older. And the older a fighter gets, the more his skills starts to decline. You ask other people, they'll tell you that, hey, it's not that John is no longer on performance enhancing drugs. It's not that John Jones is getting older. It's the simple fact that John Jones has been a champion for such a long time. And his opponents have just been able to catch up. They're getting better. They've studied him so much, and finally they're starting to catch up with him. They're starting to get to his skill level, and John just doesn't have any more room to improve. That's one answer. But my answer specifically, what I would say is, I feel like the reason why he is no longer as dominant as he used to be is because he's a jack of all trades. He's a jack of all trades, and what happens when you're a jack of all trades is you don't have anything dominant to fall back on. For example, let's take his last fight, for example, his fight against Dominic Reyes, right? That fight, a vast majority of that fight took place on defeat, striking wise. And John Jones, as good of a kickboxer as he is, which he is, he's a very good kickboxer. He's not so much better kickboxing wise than Dominic Reyes that it made a difference in the fight. Their skills were almost neck and neck. You know what I mean? Like if you take a look at John kickboxing and you take a look at Dominic Reyes kickboxing and you watch them fight each other, you start to see that the skill difference between John and I still think John's the better kickboxer, but the skill difference wasn't astronomical. It wasn't so much higher that John could really bank on that and pull ahead in the fight. Not just that, let's say the kickboxing stopped working. We saw John attempt to take the fight to the ground numerous times. His wrestling was not so much better than Dominic Reyes that he was able to take him down consistently and hold him down. So what you ended up with John was a fight where he was just stuck. I don't want to use the word mediocrity because nothing John Jones does is mediocre. But because there was nothing that he could offer in the fight as a specialist, something that he was so much better than Dominic at, he couldn't fall back on it. Let's just take someone like Israel, for example, right? Like, in any single fight that Israel is in, you know 100% that if the fight stays on the feet, he is so much better than his opponents in that aspect of fighting that he's just going to outstrike them. All they'll need to do is take him down, but it's something he can always fall back on, right? Like if the opponent is not able to get him to the ground, you always know that Izzy has kickboxing in his back pocket. He can always go back to that. Same thing with someone like Conor McGregor. He's got that boxing in his back pocket. If he wants to grapple with you, he can. But let's say Conor tried to grapple and grappling doesn't work. He can say, okay, I'm going to go right back to my bread and butter, which is my boxing, my striking. And my striking is always going to bring me success against any man that steps in the octagon with me. John Jones can't really say that. He can't really say my striking is going to bring me success against every single man I step in the octagon with. So far, to an extent, it's been that way. He has outstruck everyone he's ever fought. If you look at the numbers. But it's not something that he can bank on so much. Look at someone like Khabib, right? Khabib can decide to strike with you, but he knows the moment striking stops working, I can just do the one thing that I know I am so much better than you at, which is my wrestling. I can go back to grappling, take you down repeatedly, hold you down, ground and pound, maybe even stop you on the ground. So because of that, and also because when you take a look at the most dominant champions in the UFC right now, I'm looking at you, Khabib. I'm looking at you, Kamaru Usman. You're looking at guys like Henry Cejudo, for example. You know, you're looking at Valentina Shevchenko. It took me a little bit of time to think of her name. These are fighters that are specialists, fighters that are very good at one specific thing. For example, Khabib, extremely good at wrestling. He's a specialist. He's a special type of grappler. Usman, also a special type of wrestler. Valentina Shevchenko, assassin, special type of striker, special type of kickboxer. You know, if anybody goes in there and tries to kickbox with her, and that's what they try to do, she's going to beat them in that type of fight. A vast majority of the UFC champions today, when DC was on top, it was the same thing, a special type of wrestler. When you take a look at the champions right now, the most dominant ones are all specialists. And it's almost always the same type of specialist, a grappler. How can I forget Izzy? Israel Adesanya, the middleweight champion, is also a specialist, a special type of striker. So when I ask the question, what do you guys think is more valuable to be as a mixed martial artist? A jack of all trade, being able to do every single thing, or picking one specific skill and just becoming so nasty, so good at that one specific skill that nobody else in the weight class can compete with you at that specific skill? What do you guys think? My answer, being a specialist. I think that goes to the core of what MMA is all about. Because when this thing started, the whole entire point was to find which martial arts was the best, right? And of course, jiu-jitsu rose to the top with Royce Gracie in UFC 1. He demonstrated with his jiu-jitsu that jiu-jitsu is more dominant than boxing, wrestling, judo. All of these are the martial artists that he competed against. He rose to the top. He submitted all of them. I believe he submitted 4 men in one night to win UFC 1. And then as MMA grew, it switched a little bit. We started to see that it's not necessarily jiu-jitsu, it's wrestling. Because of course we saw Royce Gracie versus Matt Hughes, and Matt Hughes completely dominated that man with wrestling. Royce was not in that fight in any way, shape, or form. So now it's starting to look like wrestling might actually be the best base to have, the best skill to have as a mixed martial artist. But still, that's a topic for another day. I digress. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think about that. I've been thinking about it, and I wanted to open the floor to you guys. Let's talk about it in the comment section. What do you guys think is more important? Being a jack of all trade or being a specialist in MMA? Let's talk about it.